Good morning, YouTube. Warbles Online here with part 2 of the roundtable discussion and a short warble rant afterwards.
To replace those workers, but what it did do is create jobs further up the income distribution. So it created better jobs. And so we think there's actually a role, I think unions in general think there's a role for the minimum wage in terms of promoting government investment and productivity growth, Judith, because it creates jobs further up the income distribution. It creates better jobs. Yeah. You're on RN Sunday Roundtable with me, Tom Switzer. That was Tim Lyons. We've also been chatting with Judith Sloan and Kate Carnell about penalty rates, the minimum wage. We'll soon talk about company tax rates. But just getting back to this week, Judith, the Employment Minister, Michaela Cash, she appeared to get herself into some strife during the week when she seemed to imply that many people on the minimum wage were in high-income households. Now, whether that's true or not, is that relevant?
Well, I think it is relevant, and it's been brought up in pretty much every national wage case since I can remember, because the argument is, and it's in the legislation, is that, if you're going to be promoting equity, is increasing the national minimum wage the best thing to do. So it's worth going and looking at where do the low pays sit. Now, I'm sure Tim would say, there are plenty in low-income households. That's true, but there are also plenty in high-income households. And indeed, the Fair Work Commission has accepted in the past, certainly I looked at it last year, decision just this morning, and they accept that this is not the most efficient way to help low-paid workers because there's basically a tremendous loss because, you think about middle-class kids who have part-time jobs, you think about secondary wage earners who sit there in relatively comfortable households. Now, this all of a sudden became some sort of outrageous statement. This is just fact. This is what it is. I mean, I think the trouble is, I go back to this point, but the government needs to sort out this narrative before it starts talking. And it wasn't as if the government hasn't recommended that there be an increase. I think you mentioned that there was some suggestion the government is suggesting there not be an increase in the national wage. That's not true, national minimum wage. I mean, they've just said that the Commission should take a cautious approach.
Okay, Tim.
Sounds pretty
so I think
the
government really got sprung on this. I mean, Judith's right that over time it's been pointed out by governments that there are people on low wages in higher income households. But what the government's done in the last 2 years is change that in the submission from saying there are some people on low wages in high income households to the phrase of saying low income earners are often found. And so I think they're starting to gild the lily about that because they're about 4 or 5 times more likely to be in a low-income household than a high-income household. Okay. I think Minister Cash clearly couldn't explain her own submission, which was her problem. But more generally, there's a specific point here. We don't set wages for anybody in Australia based on their household composition. We don't pay people less because they've got a rich dad. We don't pay people less because they're a secondary income earner. We have a wages system which is based upon the skill and the role that is being performed, not on other aspects of a household. I mean, what is actually the position here that you're supposed to take from this? That if you are married to somebody with a good job and you enter the labour market, you're going to be paid less than somebody else. It's a nonsense. Let's go to company tax rates. Just quickly, let's go to company tax rates because the government's argument is that reducing the company tax rate will generate more foreign investment, making Australia more competitive. And now this happened late last week in Parliament, and there's a sense that this is the government's argument that this will generate more jobs and high wages. Kate, is the government on a political winner on company tax cuts?
Look, there's no doubt that it was really important to Australia that that bill was passed last week. Reducing company tax rates for businesses under 50 million over a period of time will make Australia more competitive. We've got to remember that the OECD average for company tax rates now is about 23%, which is 7% lower than us. The US has announced they're bringing theirs down. So have our other countries that we compete with. It's often said countries like Sweden and so on is something we should aspire to. Sweden's at 22-point-something% company tax rate. We've got to make sure that Australia stays competitive. But the important thing here is this gives small to medium businesses, and that's who we're talking about here, some confidence that they can go ahead, they can grow their businesses, they can employ some of the 748,000 Australians who are unemployed, or the 1 million who are underemployed. I think we should be focusing on people who can't get a job here and looking at ways we can create an environment where there are more jobs.
And yet Labor opposed this policy. Tim, wasn't it short in this position until recently to lower the company tax rate? Why the change? Well, they can speak for themselves, but I mean, one of the issues is, of course, if you had processed the full tax plan done by the government, it would have been $50 billion over 10 years, and there's no clear plan to actually pay for that. I think, it's a bit of a non-event, actually, the deal that was passed last week. And these claims it's some sort of magic pudding where it's going to be higher wages, more investment, more jobs. Magic, I think, is just fantasy, really. I was involved in the business tax working group under the Gillard government, and the modelling that we did then about thinking about a business tax cut that was done by Treasury said that for every 1% cut in the company tax rate, you'll get about a 0.2% increase in GDP over the long run, but almost all of that benefit comes from increased foreign direct investment. Now, the issue with the deal last week is that when you're talking about businesses under $50 million, you are not talking about foreign direct investment, you're talking about domestic capital. And given it's entirely a deal in SME terms about local capital, and given we have franking credits, which means essentially the corporate tax is a withholding tax, you're just moving money around. I mean, it's just not a deal that will have very much effect at all. Judith, on that note, foreign investment, how do we know it's the company tax rate that's the handbrake on attracting more foreign investment? I mean, some might say it's higher electricity prices, for example.
Well, I think it's all of the above. But dare I say, I totally agree with Tim on this. And I think one of the incredible negatives of this outcome is that we now basically have progressive company taxes. How ridiculous! So once you start to head towards $50 million turnover, you're faced with the possibility of having a quite significantly higher company tax rate, and therefore they've got every disincentive to grow. It's a shocking outcome. You either did it all or you did nothing, in my opinion. And sorry, Kate, this is really something that the small business community don't deserve, and it will not lead to the economic benefits. I think they could be more substantial than Tim suggests if you did it properly. And I know there's international pressure on it, but this outcome is really a shambles.
Kate, finally?
I disagree totally. I think this will give small to medium business, the confidence to grow and to employ their business and to employ it. Puts more money into their cash flow. They will invest that, and that's good for the economy.
The trouble, though, is, Tom, is that turnover is a very bad measure of potential profitability. Like, it means if you've got a service business and you might turn over $50 million and make 10% profit, but in a manufacturing sense, you might be down at 2.5%. It's just, it's a meaningless way of doing it.
Lower tax means more capacity to invest. There's no doubt about it.
We are out of time. Tim Lyons, Judith Sloan and Kate Carnell, a very lively discussion on Sunday morning. Thanks so much for getting up so early to do the show. Appreciate it very much.
No problem,
Thanks,
Tom.
That was Tim Lyons.
Yeah, well, didn't go much on that Judith Sloan's opinion on nearly anything that she said. She seemed to reveal the circular logic of the idea of reducing penalty rates when she said that double time on Sundays dates from the days when Australia had very regulated trading hours and no businesses were sort of open on a Sunday, therefore they didn't have to pay the high penalty rates. So therefore it didn't matter if somebody did have some other sort of a business, say, not a supermarket, but a restaurant perhaps, and they wanted to be open on a Sunday, if their business was so profitable that they had to keep going on a Sunday, then they could afford the labour cost, right? And then because, according to her, nobody was actually working their business on a Sunday, therefore it was going to be okay to deregulate the trading hours because, like nobody's trading on a Sunday, so you might as well do it. As soon as they get permission to trade on Sundays, all of a sudden they start whinging about the amount they have to pay the workers to turn up on a Sunday. Once again, I would say if you've got sufficient demand to have sufficient turnover that it's worth opening the door on a Sunday, then the cost of the wages is pretty much the smallest component of opening the doors. The fact is that most businesses rent the premises, and there are 7 days in a week. And if they only trade 5.5 days a week, then the amount of rent is divided by the number of days they trade. And it makes it look horrible to the accountant. Their insurance comes by the month or by the year. Again, 7 days in the week. So if they're paying insurance and they're paying rent, if they own the business, they'll be paying rates. Own the premises, they'll be paying rates. Electricity, insurance, rental rates, these are fixed costs. If you can contrive to open the doors on Saturday and Sunday as well, then you amortise your fixed costs over 7 days a week rather than 5 days a week. So it makes your apparent cost per trading day 15-20% lower because you're adding more trading days to the accountant's bean pile, really. It's a paperwork trick. That's my opinion on it. And all of the people who want to pay the workers less and less and less are the ones who are getting increasingly concerned about the social decay, the disintegration of the community contract where everybody agrees to be nice to each other and be polite to each other and be well-mannered and respect each other's property rights because everybody gets a fair go. Well, once you get to the stage where a few people own everything and everybody else works their ass off in 3 casual jobs to pay the rates or pay the rent, and they can barely afford to eat and they've got no possibility of studying or bettering themselves, then the multitudes get a bit pissed off, The idea of giving tax cuts to businesses which turn over less than $50 million, companies that turn over less than $50 million, little companies like that, the micro businesses, the ones that employ 4 people or less, they might turn over $400,000 in a year, and the company might actually make a profit of $200 in a year, and $200 is well below the tax-free threshold for companies. And even if it's not below a tax-free threshold, the tax on $200 worth of profit in your $400,000 worth of turnover is 2 parts or 3/10 of fuck all. The person who runs the business will own the shares in the holding company that operates the business, and they will pay themselves a salary, and they will pay PAYE tax on their own salary, and the business will generate tax for the government through the goods and services tax on all of its transactions. But the company itself doesn't actually make any profit, therefore it doesn't have to pay any tax. So all of this shit they're arguing about in Parliament over a tax cut for the corporate sector to boost the economy, it's crap. It's complete fucking horse feathers. It won't achieve anything. And when it's all said and done, tax is the license fee you pay for operating in the economy and making a profit. That's the way that the world works. There are 7.5 billion people on the world. Everybody owns the world equally common in share. And if you want to trade in the economy, you are going to harvest or exploit the environment. Your harvesting of profit by exploiting the environment, that diminishes everybody else's environment. So therefore you have to pay tax to the common weal as your license fee for exploiting the environment, harvesting a profit, making yourself get rich. That's the deal. People who think that they should be able to rip as much personal profit from the environment as possible without paying any tax to the surrounding society, they're living out there in la-la land. All that's mine is mine, and all that's yours is mine too. That's their base position, and they call themselves conservatives, and they don't want to conserve anything. They want to chop it down, dig it up, mine it, blow it up, fish it, harvest everything. And for 10,300 years, they've been harvesting everything. And they started at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and they've now come around the world. And they've met themselves. And there's now nothing else left in the environment to harvest. And they're squabbling over who gets to salvage the garbage dumps. That's a bit of a bleak picture. But that's how it looks from here. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.